Welcome to Fisher's webinar. My name is Stanley Okoro, GM here at Fisher International. Thank you for joining us. China's capacity investment cycles and what they mean today. I mean, we at Fisher understand cycles in the pulp and paper industry, and more specifically, cycles in China's pulp and paper industry. The paper industry, as everyone knows, has been growing fast, and one of the issues leaders have is how to spend incremental cash. Do you build more mills and machines? Do you grow M&A? Do you spend incremental cash on what they already have by spending it on cost reductions and efficiency gains? The question really is not one or the other. It's a combination. It's the allocation of capital across these options. First, I'll start by introducing Fisher for those of you who might not be as familiar with us. We're a pulp and paper consulting firm serving suppliers to the pulp and paper industry, producers of pulp and paper products, buyers of pulp and paper products, and financial services firms consulting to and supporting the pulp and paper industry. We're unique in the way we conduct our business because we leverage data and technology to help leaders in the industry formulate strategies and tactics to help them win in their respective marketplaces. We've made significant investments recently in tools and advisory services to help leaders understand the cycles in our industry and ways to capitalize on them. As you see on the slides, we have offices in China, in Europe, Latin America, as well as our main offices in North America. So the biggest trends we believe that affect China's paper industry are really cycles, and we'll spend some time talking about those. First, what are they? Commodity price cycles, pulp being a major one. As you can see, the peaks of the cycles are every 3 years. There are many different levels, and they occur in many different ways. Furthermore, as shown here, there could be mini cycles in between. We've done a lot of analysis of these cycles with our partner, STE, about how these commodities behave. The second one, and another key commodity in China, due to their heavy dependence on OCC, is again OCC prices. So let's take a look at OCC. As evident here, there are peaks every 2 years, except as you see in 2008 when the bottom fell out in the global economy. So what about longer cycles as opposed to the shorter ones I've shown you so far? There's almost always many patterns going on at the same time, and that is why the market looks somewhat more chaotic than it usually is. As these later cycles are the combination of some major ones getting together, forming bigger cycles. As you can see from the chart, OCC cycles have been trending upwards, and the question here is whether it will continue to trend. Well, not telling you the answer to that question is how we stay in business, so we can talk afterwards if you have an interest in understanding this better. So now let's take a look at another type of cycle, like capacity expansion. If we take a look at Chinese capacity expansion-based investments, there's been peaks about every 4 years in the packaging industry, for example. So what about other grades like printing and writing? The peaks are about every 6 years, which is not surprising considering the lesser growth importance of packaging. The higher growth importance of packaging on the previous slide as compared to printing and writing shown on this slide. Next, we'll take a look at capacity expansions in the form of new installations and rebuild cycles. Capacity expansion comes not just from new construction, but also from rebuilds. In North America, for example, or the blue or purple lines, for those of you who aren't colorblind like me, here it reflects the long cycles of new construction followed by cycles of rebuilds, which is the orange line. Similarly, in Europe, you can see the same pattern, because the cycles of new construction, again, is followed by cycles of rebuilds. But when we take a look at Asia, there's been 2 cycles, the 2 waves of rebuilds following the cycles of new construction. Clearly, we can predict a lot about when rebuilds will happen based on when these last cycles of original constructions or the last rebuild cycles happened. And for you suppliers out there in the audience, this can be used to help predict when to look for rebuild opportunities based on predicted rebuild activity. So in addition to paper industry cost and capacity expansion cycles, there are also other kinds of cycles such as economic cycles that affect demand. There are short-term economic cycles of GDP growth rate. As you can see from this slide, these are not flat. they are cyclical. They will have an impact on how capacity gets used. There are also short-term cycles on items such as inventory. And as you can see from the slides, these occur about every 2 years. Shown here is inventory of just one grade. So what are longer non-paper industry cycles? Economies have long cycles too that impact the source of growth. For a long time, China's growth came from exports. But as you can see, exports as a percent of GDP have declined recently, which is a good thing for China, because it basically means that a sizable amount of China's consumption is starting to come from its internal population, as opposed to relying as heavily as it had in the past on exports. And that said, when you take a look at the EU, I'll call it developed Western markets, EU and North America, China boasts about 1.3 billion people compared to about 800 million. Granted, when you add the other BRIC counterparts, the outside world is a bigger population than China. But the purpose of this slide is to reflect developed economies where the destination of China's exports is typically gone to. This chart is really the same as the one I showed earlier on the packaging slide. I've basically condensed it. So what does this chart really mean? I mean, we believe China will have a long expansionary growth cycle as its domestic economy serves more and more of its own people, which is very good for China and very good for the rest of the world, because China will also serve as a destination market for the outside world. There are even longer cycles of economic growth, as predicted by a famous economist, Kondratieff, a very long time ago. About 100 years ago, he said world economies move at about 50 to 60-year cycles. And looking at this, he also said that very long cycles are usually technology-driven, starting from the steam engine, railway to steel, electrical engineering, chemistry, and now information technology. And particularly as an important element, information technology will play a much bigger role moving forward in the pulp and paper industry. We're not immune to the concepts as presented by Kondratieff. This next slide will take a look at Fisher's life cycle curve for paper growth. If I recall correctly, this is communications paper primarily, with each bar representing 1 year. Based on how technology typically evolves, the increasing substitution from trends such as e-media and other technologies is hidden by the overall rapid economic growth in China. This will get worse, and then it will slow down. But we expect it to take a long time for substitution to play out for reasons mentioned earlier, as related to China's transition to domestic consumption of its output. Another new phenomenon that's relatively new to our industry, it's not new in terms of its overall presence, is greenhouse gas. Now, regardless of where you sit on the fence regarding the cause, the source, the impact of greenhouse gas, societies in general are starting to believe in the effect of GHG. And we believe this trend will have an impact on pulp and paper industry cost by making energy more expensive. And a more expensive energy will definitely impact the profitability of paper companies that operate. As shown on this slide with the Chinese producers, all these cycles and the resulting upward effect on cost of doing business in the pulp and paper industry will affect how China paper companies perform. The these charts might look chaotic and random, but Fisher's experts see these cycles in performance of paper companies. Now, the key ratios here are primarily cash flow, EBIT, and income. For those of you who wish to know. So, what will the important cycles do next? Our models show softwood prices will continue to rise, but hardwood prices will not fall. Excuse me. That said, looking at OCC, we see a constant upward pressure on OCC. So, I mean, does that mean that OCC prices will rise indefinitely? No. Because as we all know, OCC prices is somewhat governed by virgin fiber prices. So producers in China will be affected by OCC price due to heavy reliance on recycled fiber, and that's been a known issue in China. Based on the mentioned factors, near-term costs will rise for most grades as well. Everyone that's been in the paper industry for some time know that we tend to have what you call build infection. When the paper industry builds, it tends to overbuild, and China is no exception to this habit. This overbuilding tends to lead to depressed market prices for paper products. Laws of economics do apply. As shown in the chart here, we are at peak in capacity expansion, and supply appears to have exceeded market growth. And with the slowdown in the U.S. economy and the Western economy in general, I mean, China can no longer rely on the U.S. or the EU trade zone as a destination for its overcapacity, as shown in this chart. What does this mean for China? Well, the upward pressure on cost, coupled with its overbuilding and consequent overcapacity, will make it harder for producers there to generate cash. And there is a consequence to not being able to generate cash. Near-term prices will be soft. So what about longer-term cycles? Excuse me. Longer-term cycles of demand growth will continue as economies rely more on the domestic market, especially China's packaging grades. Other long-term cycles, such as the immediate substitution, societal carbon issues, as described earlier, overcapacity in mature markets, will increase pressure on China. Growth will continue to require significant cash. So if there's upward pressure on cost, downward pressure based on overcapacity, where does cash come from? Industry will continue to overbuild during capacity expansions because of the illness that the paper industry has, as described earlier, causing subsequent periods of high debt and low profitability. It will be more difficult to generate cash in the future, essentially in the near term. So what should an organization's strategic planners or the owners of companies or mills do? Expand, is one option, acquire, or invest in cost reduction. I mean, the relative importance of generating cash through efficiency will increase in tomorrow's environment. And we'll have to show a few subsequent slides to back this up. The efficiency of China's paper machines varies greatly from machine to machine. Therefore, there are large opportunities to improve cash generation through efficiency improvements. There's some good news, though, regarding the availability of gains that can be had due to the wide gap between the efficient and less efficient machines in China, as reflected in this chart. There is significant room for efficiency gains in China. So the more investments that get poured in to efficiency gains, the less one has to spend on the more expensive options, again, freeing up cash flow. Efficient machines generate cash necessary to survive difficult periods and expand in good ones. If you move this line up just a little bit, we can see, I'll move this line down, to include more of the less efficient machines. We can see just visually the impact that this can have on China's paper industry. Benchmarks now, our benchmarks show where each machine cost should be. So with the kind of analysis one can obtain from Fisher-Solve, you can very quickly see what improvements in cost position could do to China's asset base. And benchmarks show what every mill's carbon footprint is. So a number of the types of information that companies didn't have access to make the kinds of quality decisions they needed to make about their operations are now readily available from a product like Fisher-Solve, because we're now able to measure the risk of every mill's carbon footprint and benchmark them, as an example. Yeah, we can measure if a mill fails to perform effectively, because we now have the ability to look at a mill's viability. Understanding the risk from a viability standpoint, from a carbon footprint standpoint, from a cost competitive standpoint, gives companies a depth that they've never had before to better decide how best to invest in their assets. The most important adjustments paper companies, paper industry owners can make during the upcoming cycle is to shift investments towards increasing efficiency.